In the States, man, it's going to be. I mean, let's be hopeful and optimistic. I think it's going to be more important than ever to make work in and around an American context across the next 4 years. It's easy to throw your arms up and, I've imagined various escape plans to come back to Australia. But in many ways, I think that would be the exact opposite sentiment and the wrong sentiment. And really, it means that the work that you make right now across the next 4 years, both there but also anywhere, I think is more and more critical and puts more pressure and responsibility on that work to be extraordinary and to create a counter-narrative. I always talk about the idea that world builders and makers, artists, designers, really what our job is creating counter-narratives, telling stories that create a way of thinking otherwise. And a lot of my early works was kind of dystopian narratives around technology because the dominant media narrative was one of techno-solutionism. Like this new thing, this TED Talk, this startup is going to make our lives better, buy in, it's going to connect us better to our families, it's going to make your commute easier, it's going to give you a better orgasm, whatever it may be. And the role of artists, I think, was to complicate that and to say, yes, we can make transport more efficient, but it means giving over massive caches of our personal data. Yes, we can, get AI to automate a whole series of tasks, but it involves pillaging the history of creative practice and giving artists nothing. And then after the pandemic, my work became more optimistic because we began living a live-action dystopian film. The world didn't need counter-narratives that complicated naive, optimistic futures. Instead, it needed visions of hope. And I think this commission is born out of that moment that says when the dominant narratives around climate, around industry, around carbon are despair, when every other story we see about climate change is a cautionary tale of how bad it can get, what we need is stories about who else we could be in that context. And I think that's really the project of our generation, is to find ways to be hopeful in the dark, to find ways to eke out some glimmer of aspiration and positivity when all signs point to the contrary and the opposite. How do we do that? And what are those stories? And who do we want to be? And yes, there's less movies being made in America, anywhere in the world. Yes, there's less TV because we don't, fall asleep in front of a movie or a TV anymore. We fall asleep in front of a doom scrolling, micro feed of short form content. But that's not to say that those platforms are any, worse or more diminished than these broader narratives that we've turned up at theaters to see across the last couple of decades. They're just new contexts for stories, and we've just got to be better at telling the right stories, not stories that come out of the Maniverse and are tinged with Rogan Tate-isms, but rather stories that talk about who we want to be, not fears of who we don't want to become, or fears or anxieties about some fake nostalgia for a time that never was, but rather we need to tell stories about positive visions of what our futures could become. And hopefully we see more and more of those stories, and the democratization of these platforms away from the hegemony of just a small cluster of big studios, I think is actually a positive.